As the war progressed, rationing became necessary. It was only possible to obtain certain items by means of ration books and coupons. Food was rationed throughout Northern Ireland. In urban areas, small plots of land were converted to grow vegetables and other produce. The grounds surrounding Stormont and Gilnahirk Primary School were used as wartime allotments. The effects of rationing were felt less severely in rural communities.
Lord Erne's mother, when she came to live at Crumb, created a wonderful garden, and we used to go out there to buy fresh vegetables, and they really were fresh. They were freshly grown there and everything. Cabbage, leeks, potatoes, apples of all varieties.
Butter was rationed, but there was plenty of butter in the countryside because all the farms made country butter. And my job on Saturday was to take my bike. It was my job then to go around the country and say, could you give me half a pound of butter, or could you give me a dozen eggs, or could you give me this, or you could give me that or the other. And so I would arrive home with maybe a couple of pounds of butter and a dozen eggs, no problem.
Well, you couldn't have got a banana. There was one time a banana was put up for auction at some sale and it made an offer price. You couldn't have got a banana.
Unfortunately, the toast had margarine. And the margarine we got then wasn't like the margarine we get today. Oh God, that toast was just, to me, when I opened that at school, was just absolutely revolting.
Then in came the clothes coupons. You couldn't get clothes without your coupons, and you couldn't get meat without the ration bill for it. So you were very much cut down on what you could buy.
People learned to be resourceful. Items were used for purposes other than originally intended. Hand-me-down and make-do and mend became common expressions.
And everybody wore, cast-off uniform, and I remember my mother dyed the green gym frock again, to make it look fresh, and it looked fine.
Well, you see, the clothes were rationed, and people were anxious to get anything they could get their hands on. And if the flour all came in bags then, white bags, because it had on it, so and so flour, and that had to be bleached out. So we made sheets out of that, and night dresses.
And the shops actually would have had empty shelves all around and just one rack of coats and, maybe one rack of material. There was nothing in the shops really at that time.
We had all the American and the British Navy, and so the girls used to go run around with them at the time. In order to enhance their looks, they used to use tea bags to dye their legs and make it all nice and tanned. And I remember this day Maya saying to me, "Have you got a steady hand?" And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" She said, she had dyed her legs. She asked me to put a black liner down the back of her leg. So she stood up on the table and tucked her skirt around her, and she said, "Don't you be peeping, you little devil." And my hand was actually shaking as I was trying to keep the line straight all the way down to her heel, to give the impression she was wearing stockings, And but she was an absolute character, so she was. I know she was teasing me, but as a young lad, I was really shaking to do it.
No toilet rolls. That was a job we used to have to do on a Saturday. I remember my brother and I used to cut these into, fold the paper up and cut it into rectangles, and then you punched a hole in with a knitting needle and strung it on cord.
Well, you see, at that time, the league was cut down to 6 teams only, what they called the regional league. Mostly was Belfast, Celtic, and there was Linfield and Distillery and Cliftonville in those teams, because I couldn't afford to travel in those days with a petrol rationing very much.
When petrol rationing came in, they were only allowed to hold, I think it was 100 gallons in the pumps. They had 3 pumps at that time. They were only allowed to hold about 100 gallons, but they were allowed to store the rest. And the rest was stored, about 1,000 gallons stored out at his brother's farm on the Springwell Road outside Grimsport there.
Rations were in short supply, even though materials and food were coming from the United States. Swordfish planes based in Northern Ireland flew to protect the convoys.
Maydown was one of the airfields in Northern Ireland which played a very significant role during the Battle of the Atlantic. The Swordfish aircraft that were based at Maydown, when the merchant aircraft carriers would have been heading out with convoys back to the United States and North America, they would take off from Maydown, fly out and fly on board the carriers and remain with them, of course. Very simply, a merchant aircraft carrier was a ship which was equipped to carry supplies of one kind and another, but it was fitted with a rudimentary deck from which the aircraft, predominantly Swordfish aircraft, supplied by the 2 squadrons that were based at Maydown, would land on and take off from. This was extremely hazardous work, and sadly a number of crews and aircraft came to grief in the process.
One of the pilots was Hugo Yelema of the Royal Netherlands Air Force. He married locally and settled in Belfast.
Last year, the Nazi submarine campaign came near to defeat. But ever since the fall of France gave to the Germans submarine bases out in the Atlantic, the U-boats have been the deadliest weapon in the Nazi armory. The war at sea has been, as Wellington said of Waterloo, a damn close thing.